At the blind date, he asked, "Do you remember our dance in '67? I thought he died in Vietnam." My hands trembled as I adjusted the clasp on my pearl necklace for the third time, staring at my reflection in the restaurant's glass door. 68 years old, and here I was, primping like a teenager before prom. The irony wasn't lost on me. My granddaughter Emma had been the one to set this up, rolling her eyes at my protests that I was too old for this nonsense. "Grandma Rose, you're not dead yet," she'd said, typing furiously on her phone. "His name is William, he's 70, widowed, loves jazz music and gardening. What's the worst that could happen?" What's the worst that could happen? I could make a complete fool of myself for starters. I could spill soup down my blouse, forget his name halfway through dinner, or worse, discover that decades of living alone had made me too set in my ways to share space with another human being, even for 2 hours. The maitre d' approached with that practiced smile they reserve for nervous patrons. "Mrs. Patterson, your table is ready." I followed him through the dimly lit dining room, past couples leaning into each other over candlelit tables, past families celebrating birthdays with too loud laughter. My table was tucked into a corner booth, Emma's request, no doubt, thinking it would be more intimate. Right now, it felt more like a fishbowl. "Can I start you with something to drink while you wait?" "White wine, please, something dry." I needed courage, but not too much. The last thing I wanted was to become the tipsy old lady who overshared about her late husband's snoring habits. I smoothed my navy dress, the one Emma had helped me pick out last weekend during our shopping expedition. "It brings out your eyes, Grandma," she'd said, and I'd felt a flutter of something I hadn't experienced in years. Vanity, maybe, or hope. The wine arrived just as I spotted him walking through the entrance. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a blue blazer that looked expensive but comfortable. He moved with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to accommodate arthritic joints but refused to let them dictate his pace. When he caught the hostess's attention and pointed toward my table, I felt my stomach perform a gymnastics routine I thought it had forgotten how to do. This was it. No turning back now. He approached with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and I found myself standing. When had I become the type of woman who stood when a man approached the table? My late husband Gerald would have laughed at that. He'd spent 43 years telling me I was too independent for my own good. "Rose?" "That's me." I extended my hand, grateful when he took it in both of his. His palms were warm, calloused in a way that suggested he still worked with his hands. "You must be William." "Bill, please. It's wonderful to meet you." He waited until I sat before settling into the booth across from me, moving with the kind of old-fashioned courtesy that was becoming extinct. "I have to say, your granddaughter painted quite the picture. I was expecting someone formidable." "Formidable?" I laughed, surprising myself with how genuine it sounded. "Is that what she said?" "Among other things, she mentioned you taught high school English for 35 years, raised 3 children, and, quote, could cut down a grown man with a single raised eyebrow." Emma has always been dramatic, though the eyebrow thing might be accurate. I demonstrated, and he chuckled, a rich, warm sound that made me relax fractionally. "What else did she tell you?" "That you love Sinatra, hate Brussels sprouts, and once drove cross-country by yourself just to prove you could." The Brussels sprouts part is definitely true. The rest? I took a sip of wine, studying his face. There was something familiar about the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, though I couldn't place it. "What about you? What family member strong-armed you into this evening?" "My nephew, actually, Jake. He works in tech, thinks everyone over 50 needs to be networked. His word, not mine." Bill signaled the waiter. Though I have to admit, I was ready. My Margaret passed 3 years ago, and I was starting to talk to the television more than was probably healthy. The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. So many people our age danced around the topic of their deceased spouses, as if acknowledging them would somehow diminish whatever new connection they were trying to build. But Bill's mention of Margaret felt natural, respectful, like including her in the conversation rather than pretending she'd never existed. Gerald's been gone 5 years now, I offered. Heart attack, very sudden. The familiar ache accompanied the words, but it was gentler now, worn smooth by time. I kept expecting him to walk through the door for months afterward. I'd set 2 places at the dinner table without thinking. The phantom limb syndrome of grief, Bill said quietly. I know it well. We ordered salmon for me, the pork tenderloin for him, and settled into the kind of conversation I'd forgotten was possible. He told me about his garden, how he'd started growing heirloom tomatoes after Margaret died because she'd always wanted to try. I found myself describing my volunteer work at the library, reading to children who were just learning that books could be magical portals to anywhere they wanted to go. You light up when you talk about those kids, he observed, cutting into his pork. It's beautiful to watch. He'd crept up my neck. When was the last time a man had called me beautiful? Even in passing, even about something as simple as the way I talked about children? They keep me young, I said. Or at least remind me what it felt like to be young. Sometimes I catch myself in the library mirrors and wonder who that old woman is. Then I remember, oh, right, that's me now. I know exactly what you mean. I was changing a light bulb last week and caught sight of my hands. When did they become my father's hands? When did I stop being the 20-year-old who thought he had all the time in the world? There it was again, that flicker of familiarity when he gestured. Something about the way he moved his hands when he talked, like he was conducting an invisible orchestra. I'd known someone who did that long ago, but the memory stayed just out of reach, like trying to remember a dream after waking. Do you dance? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Bill's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Dance? I'm sorry, that was random. It's just, you move your hands when you talk, and it reminded me of someone who used to dance. Never mind, it's silly. But he was staring at me now with an expression I couldn't read. His face had gone pale, and for a moment I worried he was having some sort of medical episode. Bill, are you all right? He set down his fork carefully, as if it were made of glass. What made you ask about dancing? There was something in his voice, a tension that hadn't been there moments before. I don't know, you reminded me of someone from a long time ago. How long ago? The question felt loaded somehow, weighted with meaning I couldn't grasp. The 60s. I was very young, just out of high school. There was this boy. I trailed off, feeling foolish. Why was I telling this virtual stranger about Tommy Castellano, about the summer of 1967 when I thought I knew what love was? Tell me about him. Bill's voice was gentle now, encouraging. His name was Tommy. We met at a USO dance. I'd gone with my friend Linda because she had a crush on a sailor, but I ended up dancing with this soldier instead. He was being shipped out to Vietnam in 2 weeks. The memory came flooding back with surprising clarity. We spent every night together until he left, dancing mostly. He was the most graceful dancer I ever met, like he could make the music visible. Bill was very still now, his hands flat on the table. What happened to him? He died over there. At least, I assume he did. He stopped writing after 6 months, and then I got a letter from his buddy saying, I stopped, realizing how morbid this must sound. I'm sorry, this is hardly appropriate first-date conversation. What was his last name? The question was so quiet I almost didn't hear it. What? Tommy. What was his last name? Castellano. Thomas Castellano from Brooklyn. Why? Bill reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His fingers were shaking. Rose Patterson. You used to be Rose Murphy. My world tilted sideways. The restaurant noise faded to a distant hum, and all I could hear was the thundering of my heart. How do you know that? Because, he said, and his voice cracked like a teenager's, I never forgot the girl who danced with me to The Way You Look Tonight 7 times in a row on July 15th, 1967. The girl who cried when I got on that bus to Fort Campbell. The girl who wrote me letters that kept me sane in the jungle until... No, the word came out as a whisper. No, that's not possible. Tommy's dead. You can't be. But even as I said it, I was seeing him, really seeing him for the first time tonight. The same green eyes, now faded with age. The same strong jaw, now softened by decades. The same hands that had held me so carefully as we swayed to Sinatra in that overcrowded church hall, now weathered and lined, but unmistakably his. My name was Thomas William Castellano, he said softly. I go by my middle name now, have for years. And I didn't die in Vietnam, Rose. But part of me did. I pulled my hand away, needing space to breathe, to think. This was impossible. This was a cruel cosmic joke. But the letter, your friend said you were killed in action, missing and presumed dead. That was Charlie Morrison who wrote you. He thought I was dead too. We all did for a while. The restaurant was spinning now, or maybe I was. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to anchor myself to something solid. What happened? Where have you been? Why didn't you? The questions tumbled over each other, 50 years of wondering compressed into a few desperate seconds. I was captured, Bill said. Tommy said, this man who was somehow both stranger and the ghost I'd carried with me for half a century, held for 18 months in a POW camp that didn't officially exist. By the time I got home, you were married. I saw the announcement in the paper. Rose Murphy married Gerald Patterson in June of 1969. I waited, I whispered, feeling tears threaten. I waited for 2 years. And when that letter came, you were 20 years old, Rose. You had your whole life ahead of you. I'd been gone for 3 years by then. What was I supposed to do? Show up on your doorstep and ask you to throw away your happiness? That wasn't your choice to make. The anger surprised me with its intensity. 50 years of grief, of wondering what if, of carrying the memory of a boy who died too young. And he'd been alive all this time. I had a right to know. You're right. His voice was heavy with decades of regret. You're absolutely right. It's the decision I've regretted most in my life. And believe me, I've made some doozies. I stared at him, this stranger wearing the face of my first love, trying to reconcile the impossible. The waiter approached to ask about dessert, took one look at our faces and retreated hastily. Smart man. Why now? I asked finally. After all these years, why are you here? Because my nephew Jake is your granddaughter Emma's boyfriend, he said with a rueful smile. Small world, isn't it? When he mentioned setting me up with his girlfriend's grandmother, I asked her name. When he said Rose Patterson, formerly Murphy, I had to know. I had to see you. You knew. The betrayal cut deep. You knew who I was when you walked in here tonight, and you let me sit here making small talk about tomato and dead husbands. I wasn't sure how to begin. Hello, Rose. Remember me? I'm the dead boyfriend who's been alive all this time. It's not exactly a conversation starter they cover in etiquette books. Despite everything, I almost smiled at that. Almost. So what now? What exactly did you think would happen here? I don't know, he admitted. I've been rehearsing this moment for 3 weeks, and I still don't know. I needed to see you, to know that you were happy, to apologize for the choice I made that hurt us both. I studied his face, looking for traces of the 18-year-old boy who'd promised to write every day, who'd held me like I was something precious and fragile. He was there, hidden behind the lines and gray hair, behind the weight of decades I hadn't shared with him. I was happy, I said finally. Gerald was a good man. We had a good life together. 3 children, 5 grandchildren, 43 years of marriage. It wasn't the same as what we had, but it was real and it was mine. Something flickered in his eyes. Relief, maybe, or disappointment. I'm glad. Are you? The question came out sharper than I intended. Because I spent years wondering if I'd settled, if the love I had with Gerald was somehow less because it wasn't the earth-shaking, all-consuming thing I felt for you when I was 19. Rose, I'm not finished. 40 years of teaching had given me a voice that could command a room when necessary, and I used it now. You want to know what I think? I think you were a coward. Not in Vietnam. I'm sure you were brave there. But afterward, you let me grieve for someone who wasn't dead. You let me carry that weight for 50 years because it was easier than facing the possibility that I might have chosen differently. The words hung between us like a challenge. Other diners were starting to stare, drawn by the intensity of our conversation, but I didn't care. Let them look. Let them wonder what drama was unfolding in the corner booth. Bill, Tommy, this man who embodied my past sitting across from me, absorbed my anger without flinching. You're right, he said finally. I was a coward and selfish. I told myself I was being noble, letting you live your life. But the truth is, I was terrified that you'd look at me, this broken thing that came back from the war, and realize that what we'd had was just a summer romance. That you'd grown up and moved on, and I was just a boy clinging to a memory. So, instead, you made the decision for both of us. Yes, the simple admission deflated my anger as quickly as it had risen. Because what was the point, really? We were both old now, both carrying the weight of choices made and unmade. The boy and girl who danced until the church hall closed were gone, replaced by these weathered versions with gray hair and reading glasses and decades of separate history. What happened to your Margaret? I asked, surprising myself with the question. Cancer. We had 38 good years together before it took her. 2 children, 4 grandchildren. She knew about you. She knew? I told her everything before we got married. About you, about the choice I'd made. She said she understood, but she also said she never wanted to be compared to a memory. So I didn't. I loved her completely, Rose. She wasn't second best or a consolation prize. She was my wife. I nodded, understanding flooding through me. Because hadn't I done the same thing with Gerald? Loved him fully and completely, even while keeping a corner of my heart reserved for a ghost? I need some air, I said, standing abruptly. The restaurant felt too small suddenly, too warm, too full of other people's happiness. Rose, wait. But I was already walking toward the door, past the hostess stand, past the couples still deep in their own dramas. The evening air was cool against my flushed cheeks, and I stood on the sidewalk taking deep breaths, trying to process the impossible. Tommy was alive. Tommy was Bill. The boy I'd loved and mourned was a 70-year-old man who grew tomatoes and talked to his television. The summer that had felt like the most important months of my life was now sitting in a restaurant behind me, incarnate and wearing a blue blazer. Rose. I turned to find him standing a few feet away, giving me space but close enough that I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. I'm sorry, he said. I handled this badly. Seeing you again, it brought back everything. You still move the same way. Did you know that? You still tilt your head to the left when you're thinking. Don't, I said softly. Don't romanticize this. We're not 19 anymore, Tommy. We're not the same people. No, we're not. He took a careful step closer. But I still remember every word of every letter you wrote me. I still remember the way you felt in my arms when we danced. I still remember thinking that if I could just make it back to you, everything would be okay. But you did make it back, and you chose not to find me. I was 22 years old and half crazy from what I'd seen over there. I thought I was doing the right thing. And now? He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his words. Now, I'm a 70-year-old man who spends too much time alone and thinks about the past more than he should. I'm not the boy you danced with, Rose. I'm not offering you some fairy tale reunion where we pick up where we left off. I wanted you to know. I wanted you to know that I never forgot, that those 6 months with you were the best thing that ever happened to me before or since. The honesty in his voice undid me. All my anger, all my righteous indignation about choices made 50 years ago, what was the point? We were here now, 2 old people standing on a sidewalk, carrying the weight of a lifetime between us. I named my middle son Thomas, I said quietly. Gerald never knew why. Something shifted in his expression. Rose. He's a doctor now, lives in Seattle with his wife and twin daughters. Every time I looked at him growing up, I thought about you, about what our children might have looked like. I thought about that too, he admitted. We stood there in the gathering dusk, the restaurant's warm lights spilling out onto the sidewalk around us. Other people walked past, couples heading to dinner, families with small children, teenagers absorbed in their phones. Life continuing in all its messy, complicated glory while we wrestled with the ghosts of our past. I don't know what you want from me, I said finally. I don't either, he replied, and somehow that honesty was more comforting than any grand gesture could have been. When Jake suggested this setup, I thought maybe we could be friends. 2 old people who'd both lost their spouses, who understood what it was like to be alone again. But seeing you, he shook his head. I don't know if I can be just friends with you, Rose. And I don't know if I have any right to ask for more. You don't, I said, and watched him flinch. You lost that right 50 years ago when you decided my feelings didn't matter. When you chose to let me think you were dead rather than trust me to make my own choice about what I wanted. I know. But, I continued, ignoring the way his face had closed off, that was then. We're different people now. If you're asking whether there's a place in my life for a friend, a real friend, not some romantic fantasy, then maybe we can figure that out. If you're asking for something more, I trailed off, not sure how to finish. What if I am? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with possibility and danger in equal measure. I thought about Gerald, about the steady, comfortable love we'd built together. I thought about my children, my grandchildren, the life I'd constructed so carefully after losing the first man I'd ever loved. And I thought about Emma, who'd orchestrated this evening because she worried about me being lonely. Then you're asking the wrong woman, I said finally, because the girl who loved Tommy Castellano is gone. She died when she thought you did. I'm Rose Patterson now, and Rose Patterson doesn't believe in second chances with first loves. It's too messy, too complicated, too much history. He nodded, and I could see him accepting the rejection with the same quiet dignity he'd shown throughout dinner. I understand. But Rose Patterson could probably use a friend who understands what it's like to be widowed, who gets the loneliness and the way you still set 2 places at the table sometimes, who might want to go to a movie occasionally or share dinner without it meaning anything more than companionship. Hope flickered back to life in his eyes. Just friends? Just friends, with very clear boundaries and no talk of what might have been. I can do that. Can you? Because I won't be anyone's consolation prize, Tommy. I won't be the woman you settle for because you can't have the memory you've been carrying around for 50 years. You were never a consolation prize, he said firmly, and neither was Margaret. We're all just people trying to figure out how to be happy, aren't we? Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. I studied his face, looking for signs of the boy I'd once known. He was there, traces of him visible in the way Tommy, Bill, held his shoulders, in the cadence of his speech. But he was also this man standing before me, someone with his own history and heartbreaks, his own way of moving through the world. There's a jazz concert at the community center next Friday, I said impulsively. Nothing fancy, just local musicians. I was going to go alone, but if you're interested, I'd like that. As friends. As friends, he agreed, and I could see him filing away the boundaries I'd drawn, respecting them in a way the 18-year-old Tommy might not have been able to manage. We walked back into the restaurant together, and I was surprised by how normal it felt. We finished our dinner, splitting the check like any two people on a first date. He walked me to my car and waited until I was safely inside before heading to his own. Normal, everyday courtesies between two adults. But as I drove home through the familiar streets of the neighborhood where I'd raised my children, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. Not in the earth-shaking way I'd expected. There were no fireworks, no sense of destiny fulfilled. Instead, it was more like discovering a door in your house that you'd never noticed before. You could choose to open it or not, but knowing it was there changed things in small, indefinable ways. Emma called just as I was getting ready for bed. So, how was it? Was he horrible? Too handsome? Did he spend the whole time talking about his ex-wife? It was complicated, I said, sitting on the edge of my bed and kicking off the heels that had seemed like such a good idea 6 hours ago. Complicated how? Good complicated or bad complicated? I thought about how to answer that. How do you tell your granddaughter that her blind date setup had resurrected the ghost of your first love? How do you explain that the past and present had collided in a way that made everything feel uncertain? We're going to be friends, I said finally. He's a nice man, widowed, like me. We understand each other. Just friends? Emma's disappointment was audible. Grandma, you're allowed to date. You know that, right? Grandpa wouldn't want you to be alone forever. I'm not alone, sweetheart. I have all of you. That's not the same thing, and you know it. She was right, of course. The loneliness that had settled over me since Gerald's death wasn't the kind that could be filled by family dinners and babysitting duties. It was the specific loneliness of not having someone to share the small daily moments with, the perfect sunset, the silly thing a child did at the library, the way the garden looked in the morning light. Maybe friendship is enough, I said. Maybe that's what I need right now. Maybe, Emma agreed, though I could hear the skepticism in her voice. But Grandma, promise me you won't close yourself off to other possibilities. You deserve to be happy. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet house, thinking about possibilities, about doors you could choose to open or keep closed, about the difference between being alone and being lonely, and whether there was room in my carefully ordered life for the chaos that Tommy, Bill, represented. I thought about Margaret, the woman who'd loved him for 38 years, who'd known about me, but had chosen to build a life with him anyway. Had she ever wondered about the girl he danced with in 1967? Had she been secure enough in their love not to feel threatened by a memory? And I thought about Gerald, who'd given me stability and partnership and a love that grew deeper over the decades, who'd never known about the corner of my heart I'd kept reserved for a boy who died in Vietnam, or so I thought. The photo on my nightstand showed Gerald and me on our 40th anniversary, both of us gray-haired and laugh-lined, surrounded by our children and grandchildren. We looked happy. We had been happy, but now I wondered if he'd carried his own secrets, his own what-ifs from before we met. I changed into my nightgown and brushed my teeth, the same routine I'd followed for 5 years of widowhood. But as I settled into bed, I found myself thinking about Friday night, about sitting in the community center listening to jazz with a man who'd once promised to dance with me forever. Just friends, I reminded myself, clear boundaries, no complications. But as I drifted off to sleep, I could swear I heard the faint echo of The Way You Look Tonight playing somewhere in the distance. And for the first time in 50 years, I let myself remember what it felt like to be 19 and in love, and absolutely certain that the boy holding me would never let me go. The week passed in a strange haze of normalcy, punctuated by moments of surreal disbelief. I went about my usual routines, volunteering at the library, having lunch with my friend Dorothy, tending to my small garden, but everything felt slightly off-kilter, as if the Earth had shifted a few degrees on its axis. I found myself thinking about Bill at odd moments. Not Tommy. Somehow, in my mind, they'd become separate people, the boy and the man. But Bill, who'd sat across from me and talked about his dead wife with such genuine love that I'd almost forgotten to be angry. Bill, who'd accepted my boundaries with quiet grace instead of trying to argue or negotiate. Dorothy noticed my distraction over Tuesday's lunch at our usual cafe. "You're different this week," she observed, cutting into her quiche with surgical precision. Dorothy had been a nurse for 40 years before retiring, and she still approached everything with the same methodical attention to detail. Distracted, did something happen with Emma, the grandkids? I went on a date Friday night. Dorothy's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "You what?" "A blind date. Emma set it up." I picked at my salad, avoiding her sharp gaze. "It was fine. We're going to be friends." "Just friends?" "Just friends." Dorothy set down her fork and studied me with the intensity that had once made her excellent at diagnosing difficult cases. "And how do you feel about that?" "Fine," I said, then caught myself. Relieved, actually. Dating at our age is complicated enough without adding other factors. What other factors? I'd been friends with Dorothy for 15 years, since our husbands had played golf together every Saturday. She'd held my hand through Gerald's funeral, helped me sort through his belongings, listened to me cry and rage, and slowly begin to heal. If I couldn't tell her the truth, who could I tell? "I knew him before," I said quietly, "a long time ago, before Gerald, before everything." Dorothy's eyebrows rose. "How long ago?" 1967. Jesus, Rose, what are the odds? Emma's dating his nephew. Small world, apparently. I told her the story then, all of it. The USO dance, the letters, the boy I thought died in Vietnam who'd been alive all this time. Dorothy listened without interruption, her expression shifting from surprise to concern to something that looked like anger. "He let you think he was dead for 50 years?" she said when I finished. "He thought he was doing the right thing." Bullshit. Dorothy had never been one to mince words. He was scared and he took the easy way out. Now he shows up expecting what exactly? Forgiveness? A second chance? He said he just wanted to see me, to apologize. And you believed him? I thought about the look in Bill's eyes when he'd admitted to talking to his television, the way his voice had cracked when he'd said my name. Yes, I think I did. Dorothy shook her head. Men. Even at 70, they're still convinced they know what's best for us. It was a different time, Dorothy. He was young, traumatized by the war. Don't make excuses for him, Rose. You deserve better than that. Did I? I wasn't sure anymore. The woman I'd been at 19 would have demanded answers, explanations, grand gestures. But the woman I was now understood that life was messier than that people made choices for complicated reasons and had to live with the consequences. Maybe I do, I said finally, but I also deserve the right to decide what I want now, not 50 years ago. And what I want is a friend who understands what it's like to be widowed and lonely. If that happens to be someone I once loved, well, maybe that's not such a terrible thing. Dorothy reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Just promise me you'll be careful. Don't let the memory of who he was cloud your judgment about who he is now. It was good advice, and I tried to keep it in mind as Friday evening approached. I changed clothes 3 times before settling on a simple black dress and the pearl earrings Gerald had given me for our 25th anniversary. Not because I was trying to impress anyone, I told myself, just because I wanted to look nice. Bill was waiting in the community center lobby when I arrived, and my heart did a small flutter that I firmly ignored. He looked handsome in his dark slacks and button-down shirt, distinguished in the way that some men achieved naturally while others had to work at it. "You look lovely," he said, offering his arm. "Thank you." I slipped my hand through the crook of his elbow, noting how natural it felt despite everything. "Shall we go in?" The auditorium was small and informal, with folding chairs arranged in neat rows facing a simple stage. About 50 people were scattered throughout the room, mostly older couples, but a few younger faces sprinkled in. The kind of crowd that appreciated good music without needing it to be flashy or loud. We found seats in the middle section, and I was grateful for the buffer of other people around us. This was neutral territory, public space where the weight of our history couldn't press down quite so heavily. The musicians were setting up on stage, a quartet with piano, bass, drums, and saxophone. Local players, probably, the kind who'd been keeping jazz alive in small venues long after the world moved on to other things. "Do you still listen to jazz?" Bill asked as we waited for the music to begin. "Sometimes, when I'm cooking or reading." I thought about the small collection of CDs I kept on my kitchen counter, albums by Ella Fitzgerald and Duke Ellington that I'd bought over the years whenever I felt nostalgic. "What about you?" Every day, Margaret used to joke that she was married to Miles Davis because I played his music so often. A shadow crossed his face. She learned to love it too eventually, said it was the soundtrack to our life together. There it was again, his ability to talk about his late wife with love instead of guilt, to include her in the conversation without making it awkward. I wondered if I could do the same with Gerald, if I'd learned to navigate the social minefield of being widowed with the same grace. The lights dimmed then, and the music began. The opening number was Autumn Leaves, played with the kind of subtle sophistication that comes from musicians who know their craft intimately. I closed my eyes and let the melody wash over me, transporting me back to a time when jazz was the soundtrack to romance and possibility. Halfway through the second song, Body and Soul, I felt Bill's hand cover mine. Not possessively, not presumptively, just a gentle touch that said, "I'm here. I remember too." I should have pulled away, should have reminded him of our agreement about boundaries. Instead, I turned my palm up and let our fingers intertwine. It felt like coming home and stepping off a cliff at the same time. The music continued around us, and I found myself studying his profile in the dim light. The strong jaw was still there, softened by age, but unmistakably his. The way he tilted his head when he listened, completely absorbed in the music. The small scar on his temple that I'd never noticed when he was 18, but was clearly visible now. What stories did those lines and scars tell? What had his life been like in the years between the boy I'd known and the man sitting beside me? I realized I knew almost nothing about him beyond the basic facts. Widowed, lived in Virginia, grew tomatoes. There were decades of experience, joy, sorrow, ordinary Tuesday afternoons that I'd never been part of. The thought should have been sobering, a reminder of how impossible it was to bridge that gap. Instead, it made me curious, not about the past, that was done, unchangeable, but about the present, About who this man was now, what made him laugh, what kept him awake at night. During intermission, we made small talk with the couple sitting next to us, longtime jazz fans who came to every show the community center hosted. Bill was easy with them, genuinely interested in their stories about seeing Coltrane play in a tiny club in Philadelphia in 1964. He had the gift of making people feel heard, of asking the right follow-up questions. It was attractive in a way that had nothing to do with nostalgia or shared history. When the music resumed, he didn't reach for my hand again, and I found myself missing the connection more than I wanted to admit. The second set was more upbeat. Take 5, sing, 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 numbers that made it impossible to sit completely still. I caught Bill tapping his foot during a particularly energetic drum solo and smiled despite myself. After the final encore, we filed out with the rest of the audience into the cool evening air. The parking lot was lit by old-fashioned street lamps that cast everything in warm, golden light. People lingered, reluctant to let the magic of the evening dissipate too quickly. "That was wonderful," I said, meaning it. "Thank you for suggesting we come." "I didn't suggest it. You did." "Did I?" I thought back to our conversation outside the restaurant. I suppose I did. "Well, thank you for saying yes." We walked slowly toward our cars, neither of us seeming eager to end the evening. "Would you like to get coffee somewhere?" Bill asked. "There's a diner about 10 minutes from here that stays open late." I should have said no. The evening had been perfect in its simplicity, 2 friends enjoying music together. Adding more time, more conversation, more opportunity for the past to intrude, it was asking for trouble. "That sounds nice," I heard myself say. The diner was exactly what you'd expect. Vinyl booths, checkered floors, a waitress who called everyone honey and poured coffee without being asked. We slid into a corner booth, and I ordered apple pie because it seemed like the kind of thing you should do in a place like this. "So," Bill said, adding cream to his coffee with the same careful precision I remembered from 50 years ago. "Tell me about your life, the real version, not the highlights reel." "What do you want to know?" "Everything. What you were like as a mother." "What your worst day was. What made you laugh until you cried. Who you became after I stopped knowing you." The questions were so different from the careful small talk of our first dinner that they caught me off guard. That's a tall order. "We have time." "Did we?" I studied his face, looking for hidden meaning. "Just friends, remember? Friends can be curious about each other." He was right, of course. So I told him about the early years of my marriage, how young and unprepared I'd felt at 22, with a baby and a husband who worked long hours. About the day I'd gone back to college to finish my teaching degree, pushing Tommy Jr.'s stroller across campus because I couldn't afford a babysitter. I told him about my students, the ones who'd challenged me and the ones who'd broken my heart. About the year I taught in an inner-city school where half the kids came to class hungry and I'd started keeping granola bars in my desk drawer. About the letter I'd received 20 years later from a student thanking me for believing in him when no one else did. I told him about my children's rebellious teenage years, about the fights with my daughter Susan over curfews and boyfriends, about the night my youngest son Michael had been arrested for underage drinking, and I'd been so furious and relieved that he was safe that I'd cried in the police station parking lot. "And Gerald?" Bill asked gently. "What was he like?" I considered deflecting, sticking to the safe generalities I usually offered when people asked about my marriage. Instead, I found myself being honest. "He was steady," I said, "reliable in a way that felt like a gift after you. He never made promises he couldn't keep, never swept me off my feet, but he never left me wondering where I stood either. He loved me consistently, even when I wasn't particularly lovable, especially then." "Sounds like a good man." "He was, and I loved him, Bill. Not the way I loved you. That was different, more desperate somehow. But I loved him deeply and truly. We grew into each other over the years, became a team. When he died, I trailed off, remembering those first awful months of widowhood. When he died, you lost your anchor, Bill finished quietly. Yes, exactly that. I looked at him with surprise. How did you know? Because that's what Margaret was for me. I was the dreamer, always chasing the next project or adventure. She was the one who made sure we had health insurance and remembered anniversaries and kept us grounded. Without her, I float. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who understood the specific loneliness of losing a life partner. It was different from other kinds of grief, more disorienting, like losing your ability to navigate familiar territory. "What about you?" I asked. "What were you like as a father? What kept you up at night?" Bill smiled, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of how he must have looked as a young father. Terrified, mostly. When our son David was born, I held him for about 30 seconds before I was convinced I was going to drop him. Margaret had to show me how to change a diaper 3 times before I stopped putting it on backwards. He told me about coaching Little League even though he never played baseball, about camping trips where everything that could go wrong did, about the night his daughter Sarah had broken her arm falling off her bike, and how he'd been so panicked that Margaret had to drive them to the hospital while he held their crying 6-year-old in the back seat. I wasn't a natural at it, he admitted, not like Margaret. She had this instinct for knowing what they needed before they knew it themselves. I had to learn everything the hard way. But you did learn. Eventually. By the time they were teenagers, I'd figured out that my job wasn't to be their friend, but to be their safety net, to let them make their own mistakes while making sure the consequences weren't catastrophic. And now? Now David's a teacher in Portland, and Sarah runs her own accounting firm in Denver. They call every Sunday, bring their kids to visit every Christmas. I think I managed not to screw them up too badly. The pride in his voice was unmistakable, and I found myself thinking about my own children. How proud I was of the adults they'd become, how grateful that they still wanted me in their lives, despite all the ways I'd inevitably failed them as a mother. "Do they know about me?" I asked. "About tonight?" Bill shook his head. "I told them I was going to a concert with a friend, which is true, isn't it?" "Is it?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. He studied my face across the table. "What do you think?" I thought about the way his hand had felt covering mine during the music, about how natural it felt to sit here sharing stories and coffee at midnight like we were the only two people in the world, about the flutter in my chest every time he smiled. "I think it's complicated," I said finally. "Most worthwhile things are." "Bill," I stopped, not sure how to articulate what I was feeling. I meant what I said the other night, about boundaries, about not believing in second chances with first loves. I know. But I also don't want to lose this, whatever this is. I've been lonely for 5 years, and tonight is the first time I've felt connected to someone, really connected. So what do we do? It was the question I'd been avoiding all week. What did we do with this impossible situation? How did two people in their 70s navigate the minefield of shared history and present attraction and the certainty that there wasn't enough time left to waste it on fear? "I don't know," I admitted. "I feel like I'm 19 again, trying to figure out love for the first time. Except I'm not 19, and this isn't my first time, and I should know better." "Maybe that's the problem," Bill said. "Maybe we're overthinking it. Maybe we just take it one day at a time and see what happens." One day at a time. Starting with coffee next week, if you'd like. I looked at him across the table, this man who was both stranger and ghost, both new possibility and old regret. The smart thing would be to say no, to keep our interactions limited to group settings and carefully controlled circumstances. The smart thing would be to protect my heart and his from the inevitable complications that came with trying to build something new on such a complicated foundation. "I'd like that," I said instead. He smiled then, the kind of smile that transformed his whole face and made me remember why I'd fallen for him in the first place. Not because he was the same boy I danced with in 1967, but because he was a man who could sit in a diner at midnight and make me feel like the most interesting woman in the world. We paid the check and walked out to the parking lot together. At my car, he waited while I fumbled with my keys, my hands suddenly nervous again. "Rose?" I turned to find him standing closer than I'd expected, close enough that I could smell his cologne, the same woody scent he'd worn when he was 18. Some things, apparently, didn't change. "Thank you," he said, "for tonight." For giving me a chance to be your friend. For not slamming the door completely. Thank you for the music. He leaned down then and kissed my cheek, a soft, brief touch that sent warmth flooding through me. It was the kind of kiss you gave a dear friend, nothing inappropriate or presumptuous. So why did it feel like a promise? "I'll call you tomorrow," he said, "about coffee." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Then I got in my car and drove home through the empty streets, Billie Holiday playing softly on the radio, and my cheeks still tingling where his lips had been. Sunday morning dawned gray and drizzly, the kind of October weather that made you want to stay in bed with a cup of tea and a good book. I was doing exactly that when Emma called at 9 o'clock, her voice bright with curiosity. "So, how was the jazz concert? Did you have fun with your new friend?" "It was nice," I said, marking my place in the novel I'd been reading. "The music was excellent." "Just nice? Grandma, you're being very mysterious about this whole thing. First, you're vague about the dinner. Now you're giving me one-word answers about a concert. What's going on?" I closed my eyes, debating how much to tell her. Emma was 26, old enough to understand that relationships were complicated, but young enough to believe that love could conquer anything. How did you explain to someone that age that sometimes the greatest act of love was knowing when to let go? "His name is Bill," I said finally. "He's 70, widowed 3 years ago. He grows tomatoes and reads biographies and knows more about jazz than anyone I've ever met. We're going to have coffee this week." And nothing. We're friends, Emma, that's all." "But do you like him? I mean, really like him?" The question hung in the air between us. Did I like him? That seemed like such a small word for the tangle of emotions I felt when I thought about Bill. Attraction, yes, but also wariness, curiosity mixed with fear, the pull of possibility warring with the safety of solitude. "I think I could," I said carefully, "given time, but I'm not sure I want to." "Why not?" "How did you explain to your granddaughter that the man you were having coffee with was the boy you'd once loved so completely that losing him had nearly broken you? How did you tell her that some doors, once opened, could never be closed again?" "Because I'm 70 years old, sweetheart. At my age, love isn't the grand adventure it is when you're young. It's messier. There's more history, more baggage, more potential for things to go wrong." "But there's also more potential for things to go right," Emma countered. "Grandma, you've been alone for 5 years. Don't you want to share your life with someone again?" The question echoed the one I'd been asking myself all week. Did I want companionship? Yes. Did I want someone to share morning coffee with, to call when something funny happened, to hold my hand during scary movies? Absolutely. But did I want all the vulnerability that came with letting someone that close? The possibility of loss, of heartbreak, of being left alone again? "I don't know," I said honestly. "I just don't know." After we hung up, I lay in bed listening to the rain against my windows and thinking about conversations I'd had with Gerald during the early years of our marriage. How we talked about growing old together, about being one of those couples who still held hands at 80. We'd made plans, travel we wanted to do, hobbies we'd take up in retirement, the house by the lake where we'd spend our golden years. None of it had happened, of course. Gerald had died at 68, still working, still planning for a future that would never come. And I'd been left to navigate aging alone, to figure out what it meant to be an old woman without the partner I'd expected to have beside me. The phone rang again just after noon. I checked the caller ID, expecting Emma calling back with more questions, but the number was unfamiliar. Hello? Rose, it's Bill. I hope I'm not calling too early. My heart did that flutter again, and I pressed my free hand to my chest as if I could calm it down. Not at all. How are you? Good. Listen, I was thinking about our coffee date. Is Tuesday afternoon too soon? There's this little place near the bookstore downtown that I thought you might like. Tuesday, 2 days away. Was that too soon? Not soon enough? I realized I had no idea what the protocol was for whatever this was we were doing. Tuesday sounds perfect, I heard myself say. What time? 2 o'clock? I know you volunteer at the library in the mornings. The fact that he'd remembered my schedule from our dinner conversation sent another flutter through my chest. Gerald had been good at remembering things like that too. Doctor's appointments, lunch dates with friends, the small details that showed he was paying attention to my life. 2 o'clock is fine. Should I meet you there? If you don't mind. It's called the Book Nook on 5th Street next to the used bookstore. You can't miss it. After we hung up, I found myself standing in my kitchen with a ridiculous smile on my face. Coffee. It was just coffee. People had coffee all the time without it meaning anything significant. But as I went about my Sunday routine, laundry, grocery shopping, calling my son Michael in Chicago, I caught myself thinking about what I might wear on Tuesday, whether I should get my hair done, if it was too presumptuous to buy new lipstick. By Monday evening, I was second-guessing everything. Maybe I was reading too much into Bill's interest. Maybe he really did just want friendship, and I was the one complicating things with expectations and old feelings. Maybe the smart thing would be to call and cancel, to explain that I wasn't ready for whatever this was turning into. I was still debating with myself when the doorbell rang at 7 o'clock. I opened it to find Emma standing on my porch with a bottle of wine and a determined expression. Okay, she said, pushing past me into the living room. We're going to talk about this mystery man situation, and you're going to tell me the truth this time. Emma? No, Grandma, you've been acting weird all week, and Mom says you've been distracted every time she calls. Something is going on, and I'm not leaving until you tell me what it is. I looked at my granddaughter, so young and fierce, and absolutely convinced that all problems could be solved with enough determination and red wine, and felt a wave of love so strong it nearly knocked me over. When had she become this person who worried about me, who showed up uninvited to make sure I was okay? Pour the wine, I said with a sigh. This is going to take a while. So I told her everything, the whole story, from the USO dance in 1967 to the jazz concert on Friday night. Emma listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from confusion to shock to something that looked like awe. Holy shit, she breathed when I finished. Grandma, this is like something out of a movie. Language, I said automatically, then caught myself. And it's not a movie, sweetheart. It's my life, and it's complicated and messy, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. What do you want to do with it? It was such a simple question, but it cut straight to the heart of everything I'd been avoiding. What did I want? Not what was smart or safe or age-appropriate, but what I actually wanted. I want to see him again, I admitted. I want to have coffee with him on Tuesday and learn more about who he is now. I want to find out if this feeling I have, this connection, is real or just nostalgia. And if it's real, then I'm terrified, I said honestly, because I'm 70 years old and I don't know if I have the energy for heartbreak anymore. And I don't know if it's fair to either of us to try to build something new on such an old foundation. Emma leaned forward, taking my hands in hers. Grandma, can I tell you something? You've spent the last 5 years taking care of everyone else, making sure we're all okay, being the strong one, never asking for anything for yourself. Maybe it's time to be a little selfish. Maybe it's time to do something just because it makes you happy. And if it goes wrong, then it goes wrong. But what if it goes right? After Emma left, I sat in my quiet house thinking about possibilities, about the difference between being alone and being lonely. About the way Bill's eyes lit up when he talked about music, the gentle way he'd asked about Gerald, the warmth of his hand covering mine in the dark. I thought about Margaret, who'd loved him for 38 years, who'd known about me but had chosen to build a life with him anyway. Had she been brave or foolish? Had she spent their early years competing with a ghost? Or had she been secure enough to know that the past couldn't diminish what they had in the present? And I thought about Gerald, who'd given me 43 years of steady love, who'd never known about the corner of my heart I'd kept reserved for a boy I thought was dead. Would he have understood? Would he have wanted me to find happiness again, even with someone who'd been there before him? The questions swirled around me as I got ready for bed, as I lay in the dark, listening to the house settle around me. But underneath all the uncertainty, one thing remained clear. I was going to have coffee with Bill on Tuesday. Whatever happened after that, whatever complications arose, whatever heartbreak might be waiting, I was going to show up and see what happened when you gave the past a chance to become the present. Because Emma was right. Maybe it was time to be a little selfish. Maybe it was time to find out what happiness looked like at 70. Tuesday arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of October day that felt like summer's last gift before winter claimed its territory. I changed clothes 4 times before settling on a blue sweater that brought out my eyes and the silver necklace Gerald had given me for our 30th anniversary, armor and talisman all at once. The book nook was exactly the kind of place I would have chosen myself, cozy and unpretentious, with mismatched furniture and the comfortable chaos that came from being genuinely well used. Books lined the walls, poetry volumes mixed with cookbooks mixed with dog-eared mysteries, the kind of place where you could spend hours and never get bored. Bill was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee and what looked like a slice of lemon cake. He stood when he saw me, and I was struck again by how handsome he looked, distinguished in his gray slacks and navy cardigan, but approachable too. "You're early," I said, settling into the chair across from him. "So are you. I ordered for you. Coffee with cream, no sugar. Was I right?" "How did you remember that?" "I remember everything about you," he said simply, then seemed to catch himself. "I mean, from when we were young, some things stick." The comment hung between us, loaded with the weight of shared history. I took a sip of coffee to buy myself time, noting that he'd remembered correctly. Of course he had. Some habits, apparently, were as unchanging as the woody cologne he still wore. "How was your week?" I asked, steering us towards safer ground. "Quiet." I finished planting the bulbs for spring, tulips and daffodils. Margaret always said the garden needed more color in March. He paused, then seemed to make a decision. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night, about boundaries and friendship." My stomach tightened. And I want you to know that I meant what I said about taking this one day at a time. I'm not here to pressure you or try to recreate something that happened 50 years ago. He searched for the words. I like talking to you, Rose. I like the way you listen, the way you think about things. I'd forgotten what it was like to have a conversation that mattered. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by something that might have been disappointment, which was ridiculous. Hadn't I been the one insisting on boundaries? Hadn't I been the one afraid of complications? I like talking to you too, I said. It's been a long time since I've had a friend who really understands what this stage of life is like. The loneliness, you mean? The loneliness, yes, but also the freedom. For the first time in my adult life, I don't have to consider anyone else's needs when I make decisions. I can eat ice cream for dinner if I want to. I can stay up late reading without worrying about waking someone up. I can travel or not travel, redecorate or not redecorate, entirely based on what I want. That sounds liberating. It is, and terrifying. I broke off a piece of the lemon cake he'd ordered to share. Do you ever feel guilty about that? About enjoying parts of being alone? Bill considered the question, his fingers turning his coffee cup in slow circles. All the time. Margaret and I were together for almost 40 years. We shared everything. Decisions, responsibilities, even mundane things like what to have for dinner. When she died, I spent months feeling guilty every time I watched a movie she wouldn't have enjoyed or ate at a restaurant she didn't like, as if being happy without her was a betrayal. But it's not, is it? No, I don't think it is. I think the people we loved want us to be happy, even if that happiness looks different than what we had with them. We talked for 2 hours, ranging from books we'd read recently to places we'd traveled to the strange experience of watching your children become parents themselves. Easy conversation that flowed like water finding its natural course. Bill was funny in a dry, understated way that reminded me why I'd been drawn to him as a teenager. But he was also thoughtful in a way that spoke to the man he'd become, shaped by decades of experience and loss and the kind of wisdom that only came with age. When I mentioned the community theater group I'd been thinking about, his eyes lit up. I did some community theater when I was younger, he said. Nothing fancy, just small parts in local productions, but I loved it. The camaraderie, the excitement of opening night, the way a good play could transport you completely. What kind of parts did you play? Character roles mostly. The reliable father, the wise mentor, the comic relief. I was never leading man material, but I could deliver a line and hit my marks. I tried to picture him on stage, younger and full of the confidence that came with being new to something. I always wanted to try acting, but I was too shy when I was young. Now I figure, what's the worst that could happen? If I'm terrible, at least I'll be terrible with a group of people having fun. What play are they doing? Our town, they need older actors for some of the smaller roles. Bill's expression shifted, becoming thoughtful. That's one of my favorite plays, the way it finds the extraordinary in the ordinary, the sacred in the mundane. Do any human beings ever realize life while they live it? Every minute, I finished automatically, then stopped, surprised that I'd remembered the quote. You know the play. I taught it for years. It's beautiful and heartbreaking, and I trailed off, struck by the relevance of discussing a play about appreciating life while it's happening with a man who'd unexpectedly returned from my past. And maybe it's exactly what I need to be thinking about right now. Our eyes met across the table, and for a moment, I felt that old electricity, the sense of connection that had nothing to do with history and everything to do with the present moment. This man sitting across from me, the afternoon light streaming through the bookstore windows, the taste of lemon cake, and the sound of other conversations creating a comfortable buzz around us. Rose, Bill said quietly, can I ask you something? I nodded, not trusting my voice. When you look at me now, what do you see? I mean, really see. Not the ghost from 1967 or the stranger from last week. Just me, right now. It was such an honest question that it deserved an honest answer. I studied his face, taking in the lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, the small scar on his chin that must have come from some mishap in the decades I hadn't known him. I thought about the way he talked about his children, his late wife, his garden, the way he listened when I talked about my students, asking follow-up questions that showed he was really paying attention. I see a man who's lived a full life, I said finally, who's loved and lost and learned from both. I see someone who's kind without being weak, who's honest about his flaws without wallowing in them. I paused, surprised by what I was about to say. I see someone I'd like to know better, even with all our history, maybe because of it. We're not starting from scratch, Bill. We have context, even if it's 50 years old. We know what it's like to love someone completely and lose them. We know what it means to build a life with someone else and be grateful for it. We're not naive kids thinking love conquers all anymore. No, we're not. He reached across the table and touched my hand briefly. We're just two people who've lived long enough to know that connection is rare and shouldn't be wasted. I turned my hand palm up, letting our fingers intertwine for just a moment before pulling away. So what do we do now? Now we finish our coffee and see each other again soon. Maybe dinner this time, somewhere we can talk without worrying about closing time. Bill, as friends, he added quickly, unless or until you decide you want something different. I looked at him sitting there in the afternoon light, patient and hopeful and willing to let me set the pace. It would be so easy to say yes, to fall back into the pattern of spending time together, of slowly building something new on the foundation of what we'd once had. But it would also be dangerous for both of us. Saturday, I heard myself say, there's a new Italian place on Market Street. 7 o'clock? His smile could have lit up the entire bookstore. It's a date. It's a dinner, between friends. Between friends, I agreed, but even as I said it, I wondered if either of us believed it anymore. We parted ways in the parking lot with another of those careful cheek kisses that felt like promises neither of us was ready to make. As I drove home, I found myself humming The Way You Look Tonight and had to turn on the radio to drown out the dangerous direction of my thoughts. This was how it started, I realized, not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with coffee and lemon cake and the slow recognition that some connections transcended time and circumstance. This was how two people in their 70s fell in love, carefully, thoughtfully, with full knowledge of what they had to lose. The question was whether I was brave enough to let it happen.